Well, last week we began a 4-week sermon series on the subject of angels. And one of the reasons that I want us to study this is for us to be caught up in wonder and amazement at the destiny that God intends for us. Because the Bible tells us that one day you and I will govern angels. We see this in a passage of Scripture you may have never run across before. Paul mentions it almost in passing in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. In the context, he is expressing his astonishment at Christians who can't take care of their disputes among themselves. He's astonished that they are dragging each other to court, secular courts, and sort of airing out dirty laundry and sort of indicating to the world that they can't take care of these things themselves. They have to go to the secular courts. And Paul says, why can't you do this yourself? Why can't you engage a mediator in the church to take care of this? And then almost in passing, he mentions in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 3, don't you realize that we Christians will judge and reward the very angels in heaven? Now the word judge doesn't just mean condemn or pass sentence on fallen angels. It is a broader word that has to do with governance. And so the Living Bible, as I quoted from, says that we will judge and reward angels in heaven. But the astonishing thing is that the Bible is telling us that these angelic beings that we see in the Bible who minister to us, are more powerful than us, more knowledgeable than us now, will be our subjects one time, one day in the future. This series about angels then should make us all the more fascinated about what God has in store for us in the future. And so last week we began the series by looking at what angels do. And if you want to review that sermon or listen to it for the first time, you can go to our website. Today we're going to look at what angels are. Next week we're going to look at whom angels fight. In other words, we're going to look at what the Bible has to say about spiritual warfare. And then the last Sunday in April, we're going to look at whom angels celebrate. Because not all the modern and ongoing fascination with angels is healthy. Sometimes people think that a study of angels is an end in itself. And they wonder if we should directly address angels or talk to angels or call out to angels and that kind of thing. The Bible warns us about worshiping angels. But we need to focus on what the angels themselves focus on, and that is Jesus. And so that's our series across these April Sundays. We're going to look at what angels do and what angels are and whom angels fight and whom angels celebrate. Today we're going to look at what angels are. And that ought to be a really easy thing, right? To be able to describe. I mean, everybody knows what angels are. They're pleasant-looking women and fluffy wings and bright halos with these soothing voices. Or no, maybe they are these chubby little naked preschoolers with tiny little wings that flit about, plucking on mandolin strings, like the Renaissance paintings, in other words. Well, no, that may not be it exactly. Maybe they are dead human beings who've been sent back to earth to earn their wings, like the simple and sweet Clarence in It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas time. Or maybe, no, they're not dead human beings who have returned back to earth, but they are angelic beings who've come down to earth from time to time because they're curious about what it's like to be human. And they want to live as humans, like John Travolta's angel in the movie Michael, or Nicolas Cage's angel in the movie City of Angels. Or maybe they're these powerful warrior-like beings, like in John Milton's Paradise Lost, or the angel Tal in Frank Peretti's series from the 1980s, This Present Darkness. Maybe it's going to be a little more difficult for us to describe what angels are after all. Because you see, a lot of us are more influenced by culture than by the Bible when it comes to understanding what angels are. We've let novels and we've let movies and we've let songs influence our understanding of angels more than the Bible. But it's always a good idea to take whatever understanding we have about a subject like this and lay it up against the Bible. There are more than 300 references to angels in the Bible, and I think the Bible then can guide us to some understanding of what angels are. Now, last week I gave you 5 statements about what angels do. This week I want to give you 5 statements about what angels are. So if you have your sermon notes in front of you, you can write these down as we come to them. First of all, angels are created beings. Angels are created beings. In Psalm 148, the poet calls on all created things to praise God. So we see in Psalm 148, verse 5, "Let them praise the name of the Lord, for at his command they were created." And he goes through this whole list of created things that are commanded to praise God. The moon and the sun and the stars and the sea creatures and men and women. And in the midst of that list, we see this, Psalm 148, verse 2, "Praise him, all his angels. Praise him, all his heavenly hosts." So angels are included in that list of things that were created by God. Now one of the things that informs me about is that angels are more than just poetic symbolism. Some of us, modern people, especially those of us who really like to study and kind of dig deep into the Word, sometimes we're a little skeptical about modern day angel stories. And there is a lot to be skeptical about when it comes to some modern day angel stories. But some of us, we swing the pendulum exactly to the opposite direction. And we so want to separate ourselves from people we regard as flaky with their angel stories that we start presenting and understanding angelic encounters in the Bible as poetic symbolism. But there are numerous places in the Bible where it's clear that the writer wants you to understand that this was something that happened in space and time reality, some angelic encounter one after the other. And so we need to understand that angels are created beings, and they are beings. They actually exist. They're not poetic symbols. Some, though, go to the exact opposite side, and they ask the question then, well, if they are actual beings, are they dead humans that now live in heaven? Do we become angels when we die? There are a lot of people that understand it in that way. In fact, you hear it a lot of times when somebody has passed away. Somebody says, well, Grandpa's become one of the angels now. Now, they intend that well-meaning. They intend that as comfort, and so we shouldn't slam anybody for saying something like that. Let's all make sure we don't become the angel police, where we're always correcting people on things. Sometimes the reality is when we're busy correcting people on their misunderstood theology, it's not really being helpful, it's just really acting superior. So let's make sure we don't do that. And yet it's not accurate, it's not true to say that dead human beings become angels when they die. I want you to complete this little exercise. I put it in your sermon notes. You didn't know there was going to be a test today, right? So complete this verse from the teaching of Jesus, and I'm quoting, "At the resurrection, A, they will become angels," or B, they will become like the angels. Which one is it? It's B, right? Now, here's the defense of it. Here's the actual quote from Matthew chapter 22, verse 30. "At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven." So what Jesus is saying there is that we will take on certain characteristics of the angels. We'll take on certain experiences that the angels have now. But the Bible does not say that we will become angels when we die. Angels are creations of God. And they've been around since before the creation of the rest of all things. They were the first things created. We know this because God said to Job this line in Job 38, verses 4 through 7. "Where were you," he asked Job, "where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? On who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy." You notice that last line? God is saying to Job there that when all other things were created, there were created beings that were already on the scene. And they were rejoicing at what they saw God doing. And so the opening chapter of the Bible, the opening chapter of Genesis tells us that after each thing God created, he stood back and he said, "I like it. It is good." And this passage in Job says that the angels were already there applauding, giving a standing ovation, celebrating over what God was doing in the creation of the universe. And once they were created, they have never grown old and they will never die. That's what Jesus told us in Luke chapter 20, verses 35 and 36. Jesus said this about men and women in the next life. Those who are considered worthy of taking part in the age to come and in the resurrection from the dead will neither marry nor be given in marriage, and they can no longer die, for they are like the angels. Again, the line there is like the angels. They will not become angels, but one characteristic that they will have, like the angels have and have had forever, is that once we enter into eternity, we will never die. I find it remarkable to think that fragile people like you and me, who, if we are fortunate, will see 100 years of life, just a measly 100 years on this earth, will one day rule and govern angels that have been around since the world began. But that's what we read when we look in the Bible. Angels are created beings. Number two, angels are unique beings. What I mean by that is that angels are distinct creations of God. There aren't little, toddler baby angels at the feet of mother and father angels in heaven, because that's not how angels come to be. Now, that's how human beings come to be, through the process of procreation, but that's not the way that angels were brought about. In Matthew chapter 22, verse 30, again, Jesus said, at the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. And that seems to tell me that angels have no marriage relationships and no procreation that by God's design was to take place within the confines of marriage. They were created ex nihilo, out of nothing. Now, that's one of the ways that angels are different than human beings. The Bible tells us in Acts chapter 17, verse 26, from one man he made all the nations. And that's one reason that things like racism are so sinful. It's silly and it's sinful, because when we look in the Bible, we see that we all came from the same pair, Adam and Eve. And over the years, things have developed so that we have a different shape to our eyes than somebody else, or we have a different color of our skin than somebody else, but we're all on the same family tree. We sprang from the same couple. But angels they don't develop within families. Now, we see within the Bible that there are different classifications of angels. So you see cherubim, which are different than seraphim, which are different than the four living creatures that live forever immediately around the throne of God, according to the book of Revelation. There are different classifications of angels, but that doesn't mean that there are different families of angels that procreate and give other families in that genre of classifications. We need to understand that. So two things so far. Angels are created beings and angels are unique beings. Here's a third statement about what angels are. Angels are spiritual beings. Angels are spiritual beings. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14, the writer expects a positive response when he says, are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? Now, what's one thing that's so beautiful about that verse is it lets us know that angels are, by design, here to help us along in our process of coming into a relationship with Jesus and growing in that relationship with Jesus. They are ministering spirits. But one of the things I want to highlight at this point, as far as their characteristics, is they are spirits. They don't have physical forms like you and I do. Now, throughout the Bible and even in contemporary times, they have presented themselves in a physical way. The book of Hebrews tells us, Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2 says, don't neglect to show hospitality, for by doing this, some have welcomed angels as guests without knowing it. You've heard the phrase before, angels unaware. It comes from the King James Version of that Bible verse that says some have entertained angels unaware. Now, that's fascinating to me. There are some people who hear modern day angel stories and they're either skeptical because they don't believe anything like that could happen, or they're jealous because they wish that something like that could happen to them. According to this Bible verse, it may have already happened in your life several times and you never knew it. And we'll maybe only know those angel encounters when we get to heaven itself, and we're able to look back over our life with eyes wide open to understand everything that has gone on in our lives. But they're not usually visible to us, even though they have been known to be visible to us. They're not usually visible to us. In Numbers chapter 22, verse 31, the Lord had to open the eyes of Balaam before he could see an angel standing before him. In 2 Kings chapter 6, which we looked at last week, Elisha prayed that the Lord would open the eyes of his servant. And when the eyes of his servant was open, they saw these angels and chariots of fire all around them, protecting them from the enemies who had come after them. But these were moments when angels were made visible. That doesn't mean that they're not around us when we can't visibly see them. We need to understand that angels are spiritual beings. Now, the fact that angels are spirits, that does not mean that angels don't have some kind of body. It's just not a body that you and I are used to experiencing so far. The Bible tells us one day we will have spiritual bodies. We find this in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 44, where Paul says that your resurrection body will be, quote, a spiritual body. That's the designation. So it will be like this body you have now, but it's remarkably unlike this body that you have now. And in that way, we share certain characteristics with the angels who at present have spiritual bodies. It's very difficult for us to understand that beyond the physical world, but there's something in the supernatural world where bodily they are distinguished from their surroundings. They have a spiritual body. Now, if they have some kind of body, are they distinguished as male and female? In every instance except one in the Bible, angels are presented in masculine form. In every instance except one, which is interesting because in most of the sort of New Age angel stories, most angels are presented in feminine form. But just because they most often appear to us in the Bible as males, does that mean that angels are dudes? No. It seems kind of irrelevant, right, to have a conversation about angelic beings who have spiritual bodies and they don't procreate, but we want to know whether they're male or female. That just seems like an irrelevant question. Now, in our world, it's in God's plan to make us male or female. We glorify God when we agree with Him on the way that He has created us as male or female. The properties of maleness and the properties of femaleness are not interchangeable. Now, I hate to sort of throw that in like a firecracker and then walk away and say we have other things to talk about today, but we have other things to talk about today. So those of you who are in life group hour afterwards, those of you who use the sermon discussion guide, that's going to be one of your questions about the whole question about the interchangeability of maleness and femaleness. And so, be informative with each other, be charitable to each other as you talk about that subject, but we have other things to talk about today. And the thing that we're talking about today is the characteristics of angels. And angels are spiritual beings. By now you should have 3 statements on your sermon notes then. Angels are created beings, angels are unique beings, and angels are spiritual beings. Now add a 4th statement about what angels are. Angels are superhuman but limited beings. Superhuman but limited beings. And both of those words are important. They're superhuman. In other words, they transcend our experience. They have more knowledge than we have. They may have more power than we have at this point, but they are limited beings. In other words, it is God who is all-powerful. It is God who is all-knowing. And so when we think of the superhuman nature of angels, it should make us stand in wonder that we'll govern these creatures one day. When we realize the limited nature of angels' power and knowledge, it should keep us from worshiping them and depending on them instead of depending on God. So think of these things. I've written them down in your notes. First of all, they can move from one place to another with astonishing speed. But that doesn't mean they are omnipresent. The word omnipresent means in all places, all at the same time. Now, angels can move at astonishing speed. In fact, that may be one reason that over time, even in cultures that don't have a Bible, angels are depicted as having wings on their back. Because things that hover in the air and things that can move a lot faster than we can have wings on their back. And so that's probably where that imagery came from. But though angels can move from one place to another a lot faster than we presently can, that doesn't mean that they are omnipresent. But God is omnipresent. That means He is with us now, and he is with somebody who is recovering from surgery right now, and he's with somebody who is in Japan grieving over the loss of her husband right now, and he's with somebody who is in Ukraine wondering when the next bomb is going to drop right now. God is omnipresent. He is everywhere at all times, at all points, immediately. But angels are not. They are not omnipresent. Second, angels are not omniscient. Another superhuman but limited power of angels. They know things that the best human beings don't know at present, but they are not omniscient. You know, the Bible tells us at one point in 2 Samuel chapter 14, a woman was speaking to David and wanted to remark about what discernment he had, about what insight he had. And so she said, "My Lord has wisdom like that of an angel of God. He knows everything that happens in the land." So we have this verse in the Bible that lets us know that angels are more knowledgeable than we are right now. And doesn't that stands to reason, right? I mean, they've been around since before the creation of all other things. They've seen all of human history. They've seen us do smart things. They've seen us do stupid things. Somebody said that the reason to study history is to make sure that we don't repeat it. But angels see us repeating mistakes and bad decisions all the time. And so therefore they are wiser than we are, but they are not omniscient. We use the word omniscient to speak of somebody who knows everything. Jesus himself said that angels don't know everything. In Mark chapter 13, verse 32, Jesus said about his second coming, "No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven." There's a third way angels are superhuman. They display this great strength that leaves us awestruck. You think about those passages in the Bible. It only took one angel to shut the mouths of the lions when Daniel was in the lion's den. It only took one angel to strike down the firstborn of every family in the nation of Egypt during the days of the Exodus. It only took one angel to roll away the stone at the entrance to Jesus' tomb. According to the book of Revelation, it's only going to take one angel to bind Satan for 1,000 years. So they display this great strength that leaves us awestruck, but they are not omnipotent. We use that word to speak of somebody who has all power, and only God has all power in the world. You know, there's a verse, we're going to look at this in greater detail next week, Lord willing. But in Daniel chapter 10, Daniel asks something of the Lord, and then he doesn't hear from the Lord. And then he doesn't hear from the Lord. And then he doesn't hear from the Lord. And he goes through 21 days of fasting, asking God to answer his prayer. And he's wondering why God isn't answering his prayer. And finally, an angel, probably Gabriel, shows up and tells him that he had been dispatched from the throne 21 days ago, the moment that Daniel lifted up that prayer, but he was detained by the prince of Persia, not an earthly prince, but a supernatural fallen being. Like I said, we're going to look at this in greater detail next week. And then the archangel Michael came and released him from that distraction, and he was able to come and talk with Daniel. Now, that's fascinating to me to understand something like that there are things going on above our head. There are things happening in the spiritual realm that we don't understand and that we don't know. But that lets us know that that angel wasn't omnipotent, was he? Because he could be detained, he could be overpowered, at least for a short time. He needed help by another angel. But God is omnipotent. God is in charge of everything. Angels are supernatural but limited. They're not omnipotent, they're not omnipresent, they're not omniscient, and they're not omniarchs. Now, some of you knew what those other words meant, but you didn't know that that word actually existed. So if you like to play Scrabble, just lock that away in your memory because you can use it later on. It's an actual word. An omniarch is somebody who has all authority. It's related to somebody who has all power, an omnipotent person. But an omnipotent person just has a great deal of strength. An omniarch is somebody who has all authority. Now, angels have tremendous authority, but not all authority. The Bible says that angels have power over nations. In fact, there seems to be some hint that angels were assigned to different nations. Angels have powers over the natural world. In the book of Revelation, we see angels in charge of rivers, in charge of oceans and that kind of thing. But they are not omniarchs. They are not in complete control and have full authority over everything. One example of this is in the book of Job. In Job chapter 1, verse 12, Satan. And we're going to find out next week, Satan is an angel. He's a fallen angel, but he's an angel. And he has to come and get permission from God to create any havoc, to create any difficulty in Job's life. We see this in the book of Job. Now, it's a mystery to us as to why God would even temporarily allow us to go through those types of difficulties and challenges, but understand that Satan couldn't do anything to Job without God's permission. He was not an omniarch. We'll look at this in greater detail next week. Now, the fact that angels are superhuman but limited reminds me of a couple of things. The fact that angels are limited in their presence and in their knowledge and in their strength and their authority tells me that my worship and my allegiance should be pointed toward Jesus, who does deserve all those words. He is omnipotent. He is omniscient. He is the omniarch. And so we worship Jesus. We don't worship angels. That's one thing we need to know. But the fact that angels are so much more superhuman than you and I are at present, doesn't that leave you awestruck that one day we'll be in charge of these creatures? That one day that we will govern them, that we will make judgments over them? That's a remarkable thing to me. So what kind of marvelous, magnificent beings will we govern? 4 characteristics so far. Angels are created beings, unique beings, spiritual beings, superhuman but limited beings. Last one, angels are free beings. In other words, angels think, and they feel, and they desire, and they have longings according to the Bible. And this is important because considering that God's angels are always doing God's will perfectly, some of us might be tempted to think of them as drones, as robots. We can't imagine a being that thinks freely, that feels independently, that has certain longings, and nevertheless always joyfully obeys God. But if we have a hard time imagining that, doesn't that tell us more about the way we see ourselves than the way we see angels? What is the first thing we tend to say when we sin, when we fail? Hey, I'm only human, right? In other words, we seem to think that it's a mark, it's a characteristic of free beings that we're going to mess up from time to time. That's just who we are because we are human. We can't imagine a being that thinks freely like we do and feels freely like we do and makes decisions freely like we do and yet always joyfully obeys God. But every time you pray the Lord's Prayer, you are asking God to make you like that. When you get to that line, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, what are you referencing? I mentioned this last week. You are referencing angels. Every time you close out a recovery group and you recite the Lord's Prayer, every time some of you were or are in a football locker room and you're praying the Lord's Prayer as a team together before you go out on the football field, did you know you were referencing angels? Every time you are referencing angels. What you were saying in that Lord's Prayer is, Lord, bring about the time in my life, bring about the time in my family, bring about the time in my church where we are freely, joyfully, always doing what you want us to do, just as the angels are freely, joyfully, always doing what you want them to do. Angels are free beings, and they freely, joyfully decide to do what God wants them to do. Now, the whole point of this study today is to make us excited about where we are heading, what God has in store for us. Because the Bible tells us that all these characteristics we've looked at today belong to this created order that we will one day govern, that we will one day make decisions over. But that's not the only destiny that is in store for humanity in the future. Some will share in this governance of angels, but Jesus says some will share in the judgment that come upon angels. Jesus said this in Matthew chapter 25, verse 41, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." Either we will know eternal joy governing these wonderful creatures whose characteristics we have looked at today, or we will experience eternal judgment along with the fallen angels, as Jesus laid it out in Matthew 25. And it all depends upon whether we are counting on, depending on Jesus, whom angels celebrate. As we're counting on Jesus to save us, as we're counting on Jesus to rescue us, that sets our eternal destiny as being one of eternal joy or eternal judgment. And so I want us to go to the Lord in prayer, and for the most of us, the majority of us listening here who are believers, I have a prayer you can lift up. And for those of us who need to become believers, I have a prayer for you to lift up. For those of us who are believers, maybe we need to pray something like this. Dear Jesus, I never knew. I never knew. Or it's been a long time since I reflected on what a glorious future you are preparing for me. When I think about what the Bible says about angels, and I realize from 1 Corinthians 6 that I'm going to be among the people who will one day govern those marvelous creatures, I'm astonished. I'm excited. And Lord, I want to rearrange the way I think about life on this earth in light of what's coming. I realize now that things that depress me, things that tempt me, things that I'm tempted to put all out of order in terms of my priorities, things that occupy my mind and my money, I realize now how trivial those things are in the light of what's coming, in light of what I'm being drawn into. Help me then to make my decisions now in light of that eternity. Help me to arrange how I spend my money and how I spend my time in light of that eternity. Help me want to pull my family members and my friends into that eternity with me. How many be a better witness? And then those of us who need to become believers, maybe we need to pray a prayer like this. Dear Jesus, come into my life. King of angels, come into my heart. I realize now that I am a sinner. I've rebelled against you. I don't always joyfully and gladly do your will like the angels do in heaven. And so I need your forgiveness. I need your redemption. And when you died on the cross, you died to pay for my sin, to make me clean inside. And so I ask you to be my Savior, and I ask you to be my Lord. Help me to learn more about how to follow you, and help me to learn more about who you are from this day forward. But I commit myself to you now and ask that you would come into my life and make me clean inside. Heavenly Father, I pray that you would hear the prayers of your people and your new people. In Jesus' name.